Next up is data-driven approaches to publishing with Eric Gardner and Pamela Horn. Pamela's going to be going first, and I will introduce her first. Pamela is the Director of Cross-Platform Publishing at the Cooper Hewitt, where she has been for the last 5 years, and is also heading up strategic partnerships there. And for the past nearly 9 months, she has been Acting Director of Digital and Emerging Media. All that to say, as she says, a ridiculously long series of names and titles that can be summed up by saying she plays in content, publishing, and digital. And with that, I'll let Pam take it away.
Thank you so much, Greg. So shifting a little bit to what we are calling publishing and digital, I just wanted to ask how many people are familiar with Cooper Hewitt and what we do and how we work? Okay, excellent. So I'm going to kind of speed through some of the things, but basically, talk about how we're using the pen to inform even our publishing, but more importantly, sorry, and sort of looking at how our development of our content is, in a way, our pen was our bright, shiny new thing 2 years ago, and we're even starting to look at Pen 2.0 now. But the real bright, shiny thing has been this kind of tectonic shift in workflow processes and creating our content that way. And I'm sort of shifting the definition of books and catalogs to our content for our exhibitions, digitally and otherwise. So the first thing we did in our move and our renovation and our goals for our renovation and reimagination were to break down these walls physically, virtually, reinventing this 1902 mansion and making it feel like this 21st century museum. And, most importantly, and in this world, redesigning our content generation workflow processes. Cooper Hewitt, steward of, America's decorative arts and design collection. We show you what our art Museum of Art and Decoration looked like when the Hewitt sisters founded it. And they kind of imagined this museum that would have people diving in, touching things, working and schooling themselves, and that's kind of how we see our pen and our digital tables. But to do that, here's a graphic showing really how our digital content is built and gives you insight into how workflow processes drive the digital transformation and initiative. So you can see, where the work gets done and how it happens and flows up through to the user experience in the pen. We digitized more than 210,000 objects in our collection, which was this mass digitization project that took 18 months. And we basically we sought to kind of take the collection, put it in people's hands, and deliver this new experience, encouraging visual and digital literacy. I'm going to show you our object that's up now and show you just a quick view of what it is you can see around the object and how the content looks in an object record on our website. Can't see that very well, but basically it identifies that we tag every object, and every object is related to other objects. The tagging represents all these new stories and new portals for people to enter and access the objects. That's our pen, which this is how we made it, which we did in-house. These are what the different prototypes look like. There's a lot of iterating. We were our own design challenge. And, basically now that we have the pen, after 2.5 years, there's this proportionate relationship. We've been able to look at the way that the behaviors of the visitors are analyzed through the pen and the metrics and how the data informs our content generation now. There's relevance here in terms of the progression in the in that the proportional increase in need for rich content is directly proportionate to autonomy of choice. And that's an interesting marker for us to follow. So I explained a little bit about the pen, but in our galleries here, it shows you that this is another wall for the visitors, and then obviously on the website it serves as the same virtually. On the tables, we have close to 9,000 objects that are related to each other and on view. So that's where all of those stories get told. And it forms this new neurology in our system. Visitors like the pen because it doesn't distract from their gaze at the moment. And then they can save and take home their objects and really dive deeper into the content. The way they do that is when they're given the pen, you get this stub. It has your designated URL, and that is that's your ticket, essentially. So interesting. How deeply are people engaging? We know people are spending a lot of time using the functions, but are they having a meaningful experience? I'm showing you some variations on our UI where you can see the river of objects and the tags, and a little deeper into how we got these tags. And we boldly put curatorial and education in a room together, gave them Post-its before we reopened and said, tag these objects, workshop these objects. Their language was so different, obviously. We shared what each other generated and, came to develop a new voice around the objects based on a sort of user and intent and design process. So how are we going to really bring all of this content together, control the versions? So we are using our TMS as CMS. This is a bold move for curatorial, and for others who had never been in DMS, right? What I want to share with you is what the digital transformation looks like. How here is an exhibition timeline that actually lives in GitHub, shared with everybody who works and collaborates across departments, from curatorial to image specialist, editorial developer, exhibitions. As early as, and I won't go into every single milestone, but we have to determine way early on, almost a year out, how we're going to group things in the galleries, and this directly involves our developers and our gallery tech, and and registrar and our content producers. We're determining then 7 months out some exhibition video development. We're producing labels. We're producing digital table text. About 3 months out, we start generating tags while we generate the labels. This is all just to sort of more granularly show you what it means to really move digital into the process. I can get into more detail, but don't have that much time left, so happy to answer questions about this later. But basically, it shows what a sort of multi-departmental juggling act this is. So what does this mean for the institution? I think that it means that anybody and everybody who is collaborating on this has to be really genuinely committed to the digital, and that's not always the case. Some people really who work in-house, are so kind of, I don't know, a little bit tepid around the digital tables and the pens. And the other thing that we really want to focus on is to keep the collection at the heart of the digital experience. And that really imparts great meaning into whatever the digital tool or the bright, shiny object is of the day, right? But it's really, it's sort of reinforcing and reiterating how important the foundation and those work processes are. So, yeah, thank you.
So we'll take questions at the end of both of theirs. All right, but I'll introduce Eric while he's setting up. Eric is someone I know well because we work together at the Getty. He's the digital publications there at Getty Publications, or digital publications developer, sorry. His primary role is software development for our digital books, but he also spends a lot of time thinking about design and user experience. Prior to his work as a developer at the Getty, he was a designer at the Hammer Museum in LA. Currently, he's working on an open source tool for creating scholarly digital publications in multiple formats, web, print, and ebook simultaneously, which we did a workshop on a couple days ago, and would be happy to talk to you about. I'll put a plug in for our thing. But with that, Eric, take it away.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming. So I'm going to try to sort of speak to both of the things that we just heard about, both digital publishing, some of the challenges that presents, but also how our workflow itself can change as the world around us is changing too. So loosely, I'm going to call this approach that we've been sort of hammering out at the Getty a data-driven approach to publishing. So I can talk about what that means, but first I want to get kind of philosophical. Before I did design and software stuff, I studied philosophy. So what is publishing? I think that's a question that it behooves us to ask every now and then. And so publishers, they tend to get a little bit nostalgic, and they often really get wrapped up in the idea of making things, making a book, distributing a newspaper or a magazine, producing some kind of a physical object by the hundreds, thousands, millions, but this world is rapidly changing. So increasingly, it's not going to be any one thing that you're producing as a publisher, I think. A better definition might be what you're really producing. You're producing information. You're taking information and you're making it available to the general public. Now, not just any information. There's maybe an authority behind that. Some people have talked at this conference today already about are we really in this period of crisis of institutions or mistrust? Maybe what we're producing is like an antidote to that. So there's still an authorship and a degree of authority. I think you don't have to give that away just because you're moving away from a physical object. But what we are producing, I think, at this point, is less about the thing and more about the information itself. The knowledge that curators, experts, scientists, whoever are putting together. So the vehicle used for that is often going to be secondary, especially for what we're doing at digital publishing and the Getty. So yeah, I want to talk about making information as opposed to making things. So even though this is the world that we're kind of moving into, I would say most publishers' workflows are still centered around the production of some kind of a physical object. So for example, most of the books at the Getty, the final authoritative text it's locked in an InDesign file, right? Because that's where the final corrections went to before things went to press. I see people nodding their heads. It sounds like this might be a familiar situation. So that's really like your information is in there, and Adobe is going to charge you, $50, $100 a month for the, until the end of time to be able to access that content. Is that really where the final authoritative source of your information should be? But even if you're not, even if you are doing digital publishing, if what you're making is like a website, say, and the final authoritative source of your information is trapped in a proprietary CMS database, you're kind of in the same situation where, your information, the knowledge, the real product that you've made is so tightly coupled to this thing that you're not going to be able to get it out and reuse it very easily. So what would it look like if our workflow was centered around the information we're producing instead of just one form that it might take? I'm going to argue here that by adopting a data-driven workflow for publishing, which incidentally adopts many best practices from the world of software development, I think that museums can obtain a number of benefits. So I'm going to talk about what I would consider some aspects of a post object or a data-driven workflow, and then I'll talk about the specific benefits that you get from doing this, in my opinion. So first of all, as far as the characteristics of this, the first thing is text is your data. Text is the foundational starting point for everything. As publishers, that's the information we're producing. That's the form it takes. So text files specifically are what I'm talking about here. Text files are some of the most basic kinds of files on your computer. No special software is required, no subscription plan, etc. Using plain text to represent our work is going to be more resilient, more accessible, and more flexible than pretty much any other format you could think of. So plain text is the backbone. The second thing, which is tied to that and kind of builds off of it, is that we should privilege meaning over design. We should really prioritize conveying meaning as opposed to conveying presentation at the kind of fundamental level of our data here. So, what about styling and structure, right? If you're talking about an academic argument, a theoretical text, some important work of research, you're going to need more than just the 26 letters of the Roman alphabet. There's a lot of other stuff you need to convey. Plain ASCII characters aren't going to be enough. You do need to still convey structure, points of emphasis, etc. Traditionally, this is where visual design would come in, but what works for the page may not work for the screen. What works for the small screen may not work for the large screen. I think in the web, people have been talking for years about this concept of responsive design, right? So you need to really be kind of flexible and adaptive. I think we could think about an idea of responsive publishing in the same way. So we have to kind of step back and not jump into the visual level too quickly. I think we really need to concentrate on the meaning instead. So you guys are familiar with the WYSIWYG acronym. So I think that I'd like to de-emphasize WYSIWYG in favor of WYSIWYM. What you see is what you mean. So there's ways to convey meaning, semantics, structure in text without having to get too specific about the design of it. So I'm going to show you an example. Who here has ever worked with Markdown? Okay, so I'm happy to see a lot of hands up. That's great. So it's very simple, but the simplicity is part of its strength, where you can just encode, kind of like how how editors and people in our own department who are engaged in producing books have been working for a long time, where they just indicate A head, B head, whatever, because they know that everything is going to look different after the book is typeset. Well, we can kind of do the same thing here. At the level of the most plain, simple text file, we can still indicate meaning, and we can do quite a bit. We can indicate different levels of heading and hierarchy, emphasis, different kinds of formatting for text, links, images, footnotes, and more things beyond that too. We can get into some examples later. So I think that that's a good example of the sort of what you see is what you mean. And if we do this, it lets us get to the third point, which is a data-driven workflow, I think really is going to emphasize the separation of content from presentation. So if we focus on meaning and structure at the source level of our content, we remain free to choose the best presentation available for every format we decide to publish in, rather than coupling ourselves so tightly to one thing. So this makes it a lot easier to adapt our publication into a variety of formats, including things that might not even exist yet. And I mean, that's also the sort of reality we live in now too. Technology changes very quickly. A lot of formats, are kind of emerging. Maybe VR, AR will be the next thing. What's the equivalent of publication in that? I have no idea. But the fact is, as a scholarly publisher, we're kind of in it for the long haul, where we have an obligation, to people, to the future, to make the kind of content we're producing available and accessible for as long as possible, so that it can be the foundation of future scholarship. So we need to kind of keep things as open as possible, and really not coupling ourselves too tightly to any one moment of, here's how it should be presented. Trying to keep our options open is going to be a better way to work. So yeah, working this way makes it easier to prioritize accessibility as well, and translation, and also long-term preservation. So some more benefits, some specific benefits of this, of working this way, where you have a workflow based on text files that are marked up to indicate meaning but not content, and that are separated from design. One advantage of this is you can operate without vendor lock-in. Most of the best tools are free. You can retain control over your own content this way, and I think this is something that is it's been troubling me a lot lately. I think that there's a lot of really ominous developments happening in the world of the web, and what was created as a kind of anarchic utopian space where everyone was supposed to be in control. It's really getting, walled in by a couple of big tech giants, and a lot of these people are coming to museums and saying, oh, like, help us solve your problems, whatever, but there's always a price for that. And I think that if we can operate in a simpler infrastructure, we can retain control. And I think that if museums and similar areas of the public domain, if we can't keep control of some kind of a public and an accessible internet, nobody will. So another thing is, just because you're working this way, it doesn't mean that you have to give up the ability to work with vendors. You don't have to do everything on a volunteer basis or whatever. There are a lot of great vendors and services out there that will provide extra features without locking you into a particular proprietary format or something. Another thing that you get as kind of a freebie is the ability to use version control. So if you're working in text files, again, it's like one of the most basic things your computer can work with. Every change, you don't need Microsoft Word or something like that to track changes. You don't need the Adobe, version control tools. You can just use Git and GitHub. And these tools are, traditionally the domain of software developers, but they're actually getting a lot better, a lot more user-friendly. So I'm going to show an example real quick of just, we've been doing this with our digital publications at the Getty, where we have, trained editors, people who are not, developers, in the basics of Git and GitHub, and it's not so different from their traditional way of doing things, where they're marking up manuscripts. So so what we've been able to do is we kind of translate, before we go and publish one of our digital publications, the final stages of copy editing. We do everything in GitHub, and we work with editors. So this is an example of some final edits to our Ancient Lamps publication, which I'll talk more about later. But Rachel is an editor. She's not a coder. It's kind of hard to see colors here, but you can see, paragraph by paragraph, what's being added and removed, where this is kind of red and this is kind of green. The color is really difficult to see. I apologize for that. But just like in track changes in Word, you can go through an interface like GitHub and see line by line what the changes are, like as an editor is doing them. And all this is free. So I think that's really cool, and it gives us a lot of flexibility, and it's really not that more difficult to wrap your head around than something like what Microsoft Word is already doing. So that's another thing you get for free. Another benefit, and this is one of the biggest ones, is the ability to write something once and reuse the content again and again and again. And so this is something that Greg and I have really been trying to sort of fine tune, and we talked about this a little bit in the workshop we did on Monday. But the digital landscape is changing, publishing is changing. One more way that we thought we could kind of hedge our bets and make what we do available for the widest array of people for the longest possible amount of time was to not have to choose one format or another, but to just try to publish in all of them. So when you have a workflow that is a little bit more abstract and not tightly coupled into one particular format, you can actually do really cool things like automatically generate physical print-on-demand books which are laid out from websites. So I have some examples of those, which maybe, Greg, if you want to pass around. So, okay. All of these books are websites. They originated as websites, and that's still the primary format. The InDesign was not used except for really the cover pages. So the layout, the formatting, typesetting, it's all done with HTML and CSS. We've been producing ebooks this way as well. So we're still kind of tweaking this process, but it's something that's definitely possible, as these examples can show. And so the final thing is, one maybe downside, like the biggest advantage of some of these other more proprietary tools is they often tend to be a little bit more user-friendly, right? This seems a little bit more arcane, like the domain of programmers and neckbeards and whatever. Well, I guess I want to say that this technology can be as user-friendly as you need. So I have, I'll try to show a demo real quick, but the idea is when you're working in a really adaptive format, like a bunch of text files in a Git repository, there are ways where you can actually, people can edit in pretty user-friendly text editors that look a lot like Word, but more than that, if you need a content management system, you can spin one up that just kind of consumes those files directly. This is very cool technology, and I'll try to demonstrate it really quickly. So this is an example set of text files for a sort of starter repository for the digital publishing tool, which is called Quire, that we've been developing. So a bunch of text files, it's marked down in some front matter. The digital representation of this site is here, so again, just kind of a typical responsive website. This is living on a service called Netlify, which integrates tightly with GitHub. It's also, you get a lot for free. So it's a static website. I ran a process on my computer from those markdown files. I spit out a website, that's responsive and has like a nice design. Now, say I'm just a content editor, I don't want to go back in and edit these files with some special text editor. I don't want to run some special program on my computer, but I want to change the title. I set up a little content management system which just kind of sits here and waits for changes, even though the rest of the site is static. And let's see if I can get this. Of course, when you try to do a demo, it always fails. It's like a law of conferences. So because it's a Git repository, I can just log in with GitHub. And now I have, okay, I want to change the title. It's not French art. It's Italian art. Add a new paragraph. So when I'm saving a change, what this little web service is doing is it's actually just talking to GitHub, committing a change in the text files, sending that commit back to the Netlify service, which then rebuilds the entire site in a matter of about a minute or so. So it's not really a CMS, but most users would not see much of a difference. So if I go back now, now it's Italian art, so it's already changed. So this is static, but it's so fast, it's almost not really static anymore. So just to wrap up, yeah. So basically, it can be as user-friendly as you need. So in conclusion, curators, editors, and publishers of museums are hard at work in the production of new knowledge. The information produced as a result of this work has a value independent of its presentation as a book, an exhibition, or a website. By adopting a workflow which puts this data at the center while remaining agnostic about how it's presented, we can better do it justice, ensuring that this knowledge is as accessible and as resilient as possible. Thanks very much.
So we have time for a couple of quick questions, if anyone has some. Back in the back.
I'm just curious, so I'm a graphic designer at an exhibitions program, and I'm curious if this process actually impacted your design choices and how complicated you make things.
Will you repeat it real quick? And then?
Yeah, so the question was, how much did this particular process that we've set up impact the design choices? It definitely does. I mean, but I would say what impacts the design choices more is trying to design a piece of software for like easy reusability in other contexts. So what I was showing there, the kind of blue website, the very simple version, that was designed to make it easy for people to go in and change a few variables basically and like change colors and images. And so that might make it a simpler design. If you go to, I don't have the URL right now, but if you look at like the Ancient Lamps website that we did, that was like very bespoke design where there's a lot of special features just for that book. And we spent a lot of time like laboring over that. So you can make it as sort of specific as you want, but the problem is if you really want work to be like reusable and scalable, that might be what changes design, like a template. But if you want something to look very bespoke, it's totally possible. You can do anything you want on the web like that. So.
So I guess your argument is that we should do everything in Markdown, right?
That there are advantages to that approach.
Okay, because like latex and other forms have been around for writing documents, code-based, for a long time. And it seems to me the change now is that GitHub exists, and so people are more familiar with Markdown and using that. So that's good and great, and there are lots of things you can do if you go from GitHub. GitHub is a vendor. It's not an open source system, although Git is. So the caveat there, even though vendors, it's still proprietary. But I guess the real question I wanted to ask is, you said things should be able to exist in lots of different places and go wherever they want. The definitive source should be in Markdown. But one of the things we've been combating with, say, fake news is that by having an authoritative source where the thing is published as a book by an institution in an academic journal, is that it makes the one final authoritative source stamped by someone else. How how do you suppose that Markdown as a authoritative source would be stamped or approved so that people could know its validity?
So, I mean, I think that gets back to like the nature of the publishing process itself. And so that's where hopefully, you know, as the Getty, as a publisher, we have a certain amount of institutional trust. And if anything, we're just being more transparent now because someone can see the actual editing process of a book and how things got to be the way they are. There are still physical books if people tend to trust that more. Like what's great about this format is you can still have that. And if that's what someone was going to seek out, you know, they can still find those things. We're just not limiting it to that one form. So, you know, I think that the authority is still vested in the process more than any one thing. And so as long as we still have like a process of integrity with the way we publish our books, then I think the form it takes, hopefully that comes with it.
And with that, I think we've got to adjourn for the evening. Thank you all so much for coming. There's a reception up in the sponsor hall, up right, I don't know where we are.
Yes.
And then the reception tonight at the museum. Thanks so much.